It's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
No problem. My pleasure.
So before we get into your work, between writing and music, I want to start here. 6 years ago, this pandemic changed so much about the way we do things, especially the world of artists. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you do things today?
Well, it's really crazy because right in the middle of the pandemic is when my wife and I, rest her soul, she passed away about 4 years ago, but we moved. So there we are trying to pack and sell our house and travel 2,000 miles to Nashville and having a semi and everything. So that was really tricky. And my band Niacin and all the touring kind of just stopped. You know what I mean? The hotels crashed and burned and promoters. And there were various venues that you couldn't even play at unless you got vaccinated. And that whole insane suppressive kind of vibe started to happen. So, we were all just trying to survive like everybody else. And when I arrived here, we were right in the middle of the pandemic and everything. And did it ever fully recover? I don't know that it ever did fully, you know.
Yeah. No, I don't think it did. I think the only thing that was really good about it was that we had the chance to be connected. Because if this would
Right.
happen in the 80s, we would have just been all in a dark room looking for a flashlight. It would have been a different thing.
Well,
Um,
I remember one thing I started to do on all my social media while I was in town in LA before I moved is I started doing solo piano concerts every day on Facebook Live, and it started to get a following because I couldn't play anymore.
yeah,
And I remember my good buddy Chick Corea, he was doing the same thing. He was doing various master classes from his place in Tampa, Clearwater area. And so I would look forward to sitting down. My wife would film me live, Facebook Live, and I would play whatever I wanted to play. And that sort of was an intimate kind of, unscheduled thing that happened.
well, and I know that Emmett Cohen became a star because of that. I think he had a Sunday night at Emmett's, and he's just
Mhm.
he's one of the top guys in jazz today, and it was all fueled off of that time period. Everybody got to know him really well. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So take me back to your roots. Where were you born and raised, and how did all of this happen?
Yeah, it's in my first book called The Invisible Architect. The story is well, I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. We used to call that the mistake by the lake. If you made it out of Erie, then that means you were blessed, I guess. But at 3 years old, I was watching TV with my parents in the living room, and now I'm going to date myself, but that's okay. Lawrence Welk Big Band was on, and my parents loved that. Grew up in an Italian Catholic family in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I saw Myron Florin, the accordion player. And all I saw as a 3-year-old with not much critical prowess was a keyboard, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, Dad, Dad, Google. And I pointed. The reason why I pointed, and this is the inception and the answer to your question, is a voice loud as hell, just like you and I are talking, said, point to the keyboard. So at 3 years old, you don't just do it.
Yeah.
So I pointed to it. My mom and dad, rest their soul, they're in the afterlife now. They said, "Oh, look, at little Johnny wants to play the accordion." And sure enough, a little bit later, I started playing the accordion, and that launched my musical career because eventually I switched to the piano and to the organ and got in a band and got discovered. And so, in hindsight, I don't know if that voice wouldn't have done that. Who knows? I could have been working at the Hammer Mill Paper Company in Erie, Pennsylvania.
But you knew early on, from that point on, one way or another, it was going to be music.
Right, but we still had those challenges. Your parents are going, you need to go to college, you have to have something to fall back on, and you got to make a living. And I tried a straight job at a donut shop at 15. I hated it, so I got fired on purpose. And the next thing you know, I started playing a wedding here or something here, and I went, wait a minute, I'm getting paid to do something I like. And so I got bit by that music bug, and then you know, I call the God, my name from my book is the architect, the invisible architect, sort of started pushing me into music and helping me make those decisions. And then various things and successes would happen that would validate that that was the right path for me.
So did you go from Erie to LA? How did you eventually get out?
No, what happened was, you know, uh, and nobody gets discovered in Erie, but I eventually got in a band at 17 and was playing cover music, and we were the hottest band in the area. We had this great singer who was a white guy, but they used to call him the Black James Brown. He danced and sang like James Brown, so he was a bit of a phenomena. And there was a brutal snowstorm. We were playing at the Ramada Inn, and some famous producer was driving from New York City on Route 90 to go to Cleveland, where he lived, and had to go by Erie, and the snowstorm was so bad that he pulled off the road at a Ramada Inn. After he checked in, he went down into to get a drink, and my band was playing, and he was one of the only ones in the place, and he thought we were incredible and very unique, and he walked up to me after our set, and he goes, "It looks like you're the musical director, right?" And I said, "Sorta, yeah." And he goes, "Well, listen, are you signed?" I didn't even know what that meant, Joe.
Yeah,
What did
sure.
signed mean? I'm in Erie, Pennsylvania playing cover music, you know? And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he says, "Well, it's a record deal." I said, "No." He goes, "Well, you are now." And 3 weeks later, we got a record deal, brought it to an attorney. And in those days, you released a 45, a single first. And if it hit, then you did the rest of the record. And so we released a single and went number 3 in the local charts, tri-state area of New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And then we were about to do a record, and we would drive up to Cleveland to record from Erie, which is only 90 miles. And next thing you know, our singer gets drafted. And that was the end of the deal because then they dropped us like a hot potato. But that gave me that taste that I went, oh my God, I got to do this. And so then your question was what happened? Well, then somebody told me about Berklee College of Music in Boston being one of the greatest places to study music, contemporary music and jazz and arranging. So I went there for a summer session and loved it. So I stayed there. I didn't graduate, but I did sort of the meat and potatoes, the meat and potato kind of courses and everything. And then a friend of mine moved out to California. So I moved out to California and got sort of made it big out there. You know?
So talk to me a little bit about the first live show you saw, jazz or otherwise, that blew you away, that maybe galvanized the idea that you wanted to do that.
As far as jazz, because I wasn't a jazz player, I grew up, you know, playing soul and funk and R&B and all that kind of stuff. And I loved it. But one day, and this is crucial for me, the drummer who was a collector of albums, he always had great artists. He came to one of our band rehearsals and he goes, "I discovered two guys, and one was Chick Corea trio, piano trio, and it was called ARC record, and then Oscar Peterson." So I went home and listened to these two things, and they were worlds apart, right? But I didn't know anything about jazz. I was like a B3 blues player playing funk and R&B and Tower of Power and all that kind of stuff. And I went, what the hell is this guy Chick Corea doing? And then Oscar Peterson, I was like, oh my God, I've died and went to heaven. So I went back to my accordion teacher, who also was a jazz guy, because I started studying piano from him before. And I said, what the heck is this jazz stuff? So he started teaching me jazz voicings and how to improvise and expand my blues concept. And then that made me go out to California. And I did, to answer your question specifically, found out that Oscar Peterson was going to be in Rochester, New York, which was only 160 miles from Erie. So me and my friend drove up to a club and saw Oscar Peterson. And that was it. And I eventually met Chick Corea when I moved to Boston because he was from Chelsea. And he and I became great friends. He even wrote the foreword to one of my music instructions books.
Wow. So when you finally decided that you wanted to become a musician, this was going to be your destiny. What's been the difference? What was the difference between the dream of what you had thought it was going to be like to be a musician, to be a paid musician, and then actually living that life?
Well, the funny thing was at 9 years old, um, I had already been playing the accordion, the old Italian Catholic thing, and you're playing for all the relatives and everything. And my uncle was going to have an outdoor, uh, I don't know what it was, if it was a wedding, whatever. He wanted to know if little Johnny, me, would play the accordion, and I was scared. I never played really in front of a boisterous clan of Italians, right? So I'm outside. And I set up my music stand and I'm playing and nobody's paying attention. They're all screaming and yelling at each other like Italians do. And one of my grandfathers comes over and he goes, "Hey, what's up?" don't you know how to get people? And I'm like 9 years old. I don't know what he's talking about. He goes, you know the tarantella? And I go, yeah, yeah, da, da, da. He goes, yeah, stand up and start playing that, and I'll help you get going. So I started playing the tarantella on the accordion, standing up. I felt like a Pied Piper. Next thing you know, there's a whole line of Italians behind me, and I'm walking around with this 30-pound instrument. And at the end of the night, I got $9. I went, oh my God, I just made money. I made lots of money here. This is great. In those days, that was a lot of money. And so that was a key uh, moment of me wanting to like play in front of people and get paid at the same time.
So you also are an interesting hybrid of a right and left brain. You're an author in metaphysics. Talk to me a little bit about that other side of you besides the music and the creativity.
Well, for some reason, this lifetime, after I had that blessed, I call it in my one book, The Invisible Architect, a cosmic whisper. And that voice stayed with me my whole life and still to this day. And I originally just called it an inner voice or a higher self. And then later on, I made a decision that this was source talking to me and I was blessed. And so I interacted with that and I wrote that book. But before I did that, my whole life of trying to be a greater musician, as you know, from trying to become one, you have to sort of become one with yourself in order to play. And so on the side in school, I always studied philosophy, starting, of course, with fundamentals in the Bible, growing up as a Catholic, and then moving on to various philosophers. So I had a very rich history of research of reading these books, but I only did it to help enhance my playing, especially as I got into jazz, where you had to really be self-determined and blow and really be one with yourself. But then one day I woke up and that voice in 2018, 19 said, you need to pay it forward. I went, what the hell are you talking about? And I'd already written music books that were well known, the contemporary keyboardist, Hal Leonard, and but I'd never written a contemporary, I mean, a metaphysical type book. But my first wife passed away in 2000 from breast cancer. So I had all these after death communications that were clear as a bell. So I started researching that area and finding all these authors about all these people that have after death communications. And then uh, when I got this sort of command order to pay it forward, I wrote all about my interactions with this higher self voice, which I called the invisible architect. And that got me into this area. And then lo and behold, here's a jazz guy that has an Amazon #1 best-selling book in metaphysics. Go figure. I went, what the heck is going on here? I'm not complaining, but I'm confused. And next thing you know, I got people all over the world sending me emails going, hey, do you do one-on-one mentoring regarding the metaphysical fundamentals in your book? And I kind of lied and said, yeah, okay. Next thing you know, I hung up a shingle, and to this day, I've been doing a lot of mentoring in the area where I help people realize their fullest potential and who they really are in this particular lifetime. Remember the movie, what was it called? Groundhog Day with Bill Murray?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he has to live life hundreds and hundreds over and over and over again every day in order to be not become a narcissistic, a-hole. And so reincarnation concept is a similar thing. We go through lives and review and we get better and better. But we can speed up that whole process if we can study this. And there's a lot of information regarding that. So my book starts doing that, and my mentoring helps people realize their full potential.
So how do those two worlds feed off of each other? How does this world of helping people figure out their true chi in life and from metaphysics to music, do they play and feed off of each other?
Well, I think they do. In my case, they really did, because my studies in this area made I call it raising your frequency, the God frequency or the architect frequency. If you look at that as source, universal consciousness, and that we are sparks, like even Jesus said, I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I. Well, as we raise our frequency towards the God frequency, or in physics, they call it the God particle, then we are able to know more about ourselves and create a better life. So to me, it doesn't matter whether you're a waitress or a car mechanic or a screenplay writer or a jazz musician. That's not what we came here for. Those are the roles that we chose for whatever reason. But we're here to find out more about our divinity, remember who we are, and help service others. And so music was my first way, but that just inspired people. So I enjoy getting on stage, playing very soulful music and making people feel good. But at the end of the day, they still have to go home to their life, right? That concert may have inspired them for an hour, maybe a week. But my studies in metaphysics got me to an area like, oh, I can actually help people a little bit more than just entertainment. I can actually help them find out more about themselves. And so my research led me in that area. So for me, metaphysics and music are one because I remember I read a book once, I don't know who it was. Right now, it's an anonymous quote, is that music is God's language. And I really love that statement.
Yeah, that's so true. Who's been your hero? Who's been your inspirational force that's allowed you to have this success and to see the world the way you do?
Well, my three sort of teaching mentors, Basil Ronzitti in Erie, Pennsylvania, that guy that helped me get into jazz and play accordion and transfer to the piano in B3. And then I moved to Boston and Charlie Benakis, rest his soul, he passed away. He was one of the top bebop teachers in the world everybody studied with that was anybody. And then when I went to University of Edinburgh, I studied classical music and contemporary music by Dr. Paul Martin. So those are three, forming mentors. But as far as artists, uh, Chick Corea probably has helped me the most because not only did his music inspire me like all these other ones did, of course, I have many, but I got to be really friends with him and I moved out to California and got to see him and visit him and see how he composed and was a band leader, saw his charts and everything. So as a music mentor, he was probably the most hands-on. The other ones were more inspirational.
Yeah. So if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one jazz show, where are you going to go? What are you going to see?
One jazz show?
Yeah, one jazz show.
Wow, that's a really big challenge, Joe.
Well, it could be we could it could be a string of shows if you need to.
Well, my first live Chick Corea show was in Boston at the Emporium because I had moved there to study music at Berkeley. And then he came into town and we were already, and remember, there's no computers and things during those
Yeah,
days. So I became pen pals with Chick Corea by writing a snail mail letter to the back of his one of his albums. Remember those
yeah.
Jurassic Park things, albums? And he answered me by snail mail, and we became pen pals. So when I went to Boston, I wrote him. I said, "Hey, Chick, I now live in Boston. I'm going to school at Berkeley." And he gave me his phone number and we talked and I went to the Emporium and he literally let me come backstage. I went to his sound check and rehearsal and then sat in front row and got to see the rehearsal and sound check and this most amazing jazz fusion concert, with Joe Farrow and Airto and all these people. That
Yeah.
was totally inspirational. Uh, and then I saw a concert. Now we're going to jump to a whole different guy. Most people don't know how talented this guy is, but Edgar Winter
Yep.
from Texas, and he's known more as a blues rock guy. But his first record entrance was all jazz and fusion, like Gino Vanelli kind of stuff. And it didn't do well, but it was amazing. And I got to be friends with him, and I ended up touring with him and did a few dates. So those two guys were very inspirational. And then Stevie Wonder, I became good friends with because my first wife was his vocal teacher. So I used to see him all the time. So those three guys who I seen live and interacted with and become friends were probably a good answer to the question. Miles Davis and all those guys, of course.
Yeah.
Keith
Yeah.
Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer as a B3 player, Jimmy Smith as a B3 player, those kind of guys.
So you've won a Grammy. What was it like when you held it in your hand? I know that a lot of people hold it on this high pedestal of music. What was that moment like for you?
Well, mine wasn't individual Grammy. They were two group Grammys
Sure.
because I was a musical director for the Taste of Honey, and that's a funny story because I moved out to California after all these studies, and I get discovered at the Guitar Center, and I become the MD to a disco band. I I didn't have to go to Berkeley to play four chords, and I wasn't even a fan of disco music. And here I am touring all over the world, making all kinds of money. So when I moved out there, I was broke. I was like, after the move from Boston to LA, I didn't have any money. I knew Chick Corea, but he was way up high. He wasn't going to help me survive. So I got this gig as the MD, and then there we win a Grammy as the best new artist the first year. So that's kind of crazy. But I've never won a personal Grammy for my jazz music, and not that that's a goal of mine. Whatever's in store for me is in store for me.
So at the end of the day, at this point in your career and life, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I feel very blessed, and I don't want to step on people's beliefs. I don't know who watches your show. Some people believe, in one life, and when you're done, that's it. Some people believe in one life, and you're done, you go to heaven and hell. My studies show that we live many lives, just like Groundhog Day, and we keep getting better and better through our incarnations and reincarnation. And so to me, I've lived many, many lifetimes, and I've grown and remembered who I was because I know I'm a spark of the Creator. We all are sparks of the Creator. And so I feel very blessed in this lifetime that I was sort of picked to say, carry the metaphysical torch, because I never thought that. If anything, my success musically led into a lot of teaching and a lot of teaching instructional books on Hal Leonard. So I feel like I'm helping the area of music by helping people know more about music and jazz and blues. And that all is all good, but to segue into this parallel thing and helping people. So to me, I feel like I'm a bit of a modern day mystic, and I don't mean that to be self-important, but a mystic is somebody that feels they have a connection with source. And I had that connection at 3 years old, so I feel it's my duty to take my musical talent and inspire people, because it's God's music, God's language is music, but at the same time, I can go to that next step. So I feel very blessed to have both of these hats on at the same time.
So let's do a proper plug for books and music, things that are going on now, things that are in the works. What's going on right now?
Well, my one-on-one mentoring has taken off, and like I said earlier, I didn't even think about that. But so I do elite one-on-one mentoring. So for anybody, in fact, sometimes I work with very, very wealthy people who are retired and don't have money as a problem, but they have all kinds of other things and things going on. And some people are, having problem with making money in a career. And so I have a website called go.johnnovelloauthor.com, go.johnnovelloauthor.com, which is my mentor site for people that want to talk with me one-on-one for free and see if one-on-one mentoring can help them. That's a plug for my mentoring. And then my music site is Keys Novello, Keys, keysnovello.com. If they want to find out more about my music and all my CDs and things like that. Haven't been touring for a while, but we're getting ready to do another, my band Niacin, which is a prog rock fusion band with Billy Sheehan on bass and Dennis Chambers on drums and me on Hammond B3. We've got about 10 CDs out, but we haven't toured since right before COVID. So we're probably going to do a new record coming out maybe the end of this year, beginning next year, and start touring again if God allows that.
Absolutely. Well, I will get all these links in the show notes. What a joy, John. Great to meet you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your story, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And